Welcome. This quick walkthrough will cover how to create a REST proxy using Apache Camel in Talend Studio. We're going to create a proxy for the ARIN Whois service. ARIN is the American Registry for Internet Numbers, and it exposes a RESTful API for the traditional Internet Whois directory. As a RESTful interface, it focuses on resources such as organizations, points of contact, the network, and IP addresses. Here is an example of invoking the RESTful service for an arbitrary IP address. When we invoke it, we get back well-structured XML, including hyperlinks to other resources for the organization. In the course of our example, we're going to cover a few key Camel concepts. We will talk about HTTP producers and consumers in Camel, and how Camel maps HTTP headers to Camel headers. We'll also talk about the relationship between message headers in Camel and exchange properties. Finally, we'll show you how to use data formats in Camel to seamlessly transform from XML payloads to JSON payloads. We're going to be using the following Camel components during this demo. All of these are documented on the Apache Camel site, as well as in the Talend documentation available at help.talend.com. We're going to start off by receiving an HTTP message using the Camel Jetty component, and eventually we're going to invoke the ARIN service using the Camel HTTP component. When we get the final result back from ARIN, we are going to use the content-based router to conditionally route it based on the data format requested by the client browser. If the client browser requested JSON, we're going to route the return message to the Camel XML JSON data format to marshal from XML to JSON. So let's see that in action in the Camel Studio. Here we are in the Camel Studio, and we're in the mediation perspective. We begin with the CHTTP component, which in this case is implementing the Camel Jetty endpoint. We are listening on port 9011 of the local host, and because we've marked the match on URI prefix, we are going to route any message that begins with the URL ARIN to this endpoint. So typically, the URL will look like something like ARIN/IP address. Once we receive that message, we're going to log the request, including any headers and properties, just for our diagnostic purposes. At that point, we will then inspect the accept header, which has been mapped automatically by Camel from the HTTP accept header to the Camel header. And we're going to store that away as a special property of the exchange so that we can use it later. Then we're going to repeat that, but this time we are going to inspect a different header, the header stored under the HTTP path. And this is where the original request URL is stored. We're going to parse that and strip off the IP address. Once we've got that, we're going to store that away in a separate exchange property also. Now we're going to clear out all of the other headers. And the reason we're going to do this extra bit of due diligence is because the headers in Camel benefit from a lot of convention over configuration. Camel will automatically map headers from HTTP requests, or for that matter from SOAP or JMS requests, and it will map those headers to the Camel headers in your message so that they are available for you to manipulate. However, once you're sending the message outbound on this Camel producer, the producer follows the same conventions, and sometimes this can cause unexpected behavior. Occasionally, it could cause an exception to be thrown, but in other cases, you may well just be sending out information as headers and outbound HTTP requests, which may be sensitive and really shouldn't be there. So always be diligent and pay attention to your message headers. Here we are programming defensively. We've already extracted all the information we want into Exchange properties, so we're going to remove everything else. Now there is one header we need to set, and that is the Exchange HTTP URI header. Here we're setting it to the base URL for the ARIN service, and then we are appending dynamically the particular IP address of the original request. And recall, that is what we stored away at this step as an Exchange property. So it's now available to us here. At this point, we're finished, and we are ready to route it to the Camel producer. Here, the Camel producer has a URI, but in fact, that URI will be ignored because the Camel API for the Camel HTTP component says that this header will override any setting here. So a quick word here to distinguish Camel terminology. This endpoint is a Camel consumer. It consumes messages from the external world. This is where we are exposing our proxy. We are going to consume those inbound messages. We're going to manipulate that inside the Camel route. And now that we are ready, we are going to produce a message where we are acting in the role of client to the actual ARIN service. When ARIN returns the message, we are going to send it to this content-based router, which will inspect the original accept property that we've saved. If the original client requested a JSON payload, we are going to then use the Camel XML to JSON data format to marshal this to JSON. This is all you need to do. There is no special magic where we have to define, intricate transformations from XML to JSON. It is all done for you. Having done that, we want to set the HTTP content type header on the final response to the client to reflect that we are sending JSON. So let's see this in action. Here we are going to run our route, and we see that it has exposed our service on localhost on port 9011 with the URL path of ARIN. So now let's invoke our proxy. Here's our path, and here is the IP that we're going to test. We get back JSON rather than XML, and that is because in our request we sent the accept HTTP header with the value of application JSON. And so it went to the content-based router. The content-based router looked up where we had stored this value in the Exchange property, and it then invoked the Camel XML JSON data formatter. If we were to put application XML here, instead it would return XML. So a few last points. In order to use the Camel XML JSON data format, we had to add those libraries in the C config path. And here's the key component, the Camel XML JSON. The others are dependencies of that, and when you've loaded them, you're good to go. So in summary, this example has shown you how to create a simple REST proxy, which both receives inbound RESTful requests, as well as invokes external REST endpoints. In the course of doing that, we've used a content-based router to conditionally invoke an XML JSON data format. We've also seen the difference between message headers and Exchange properties and talked a little bit about the need to be diligent in monitoring and cleaning up message headers. All of this is documented online at the Talend portal at help.talend.com. Thank you very much.